Scripture reading today is from Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 37. I'll be reading from a version of the Bible as if it would have happened today. A seminary professor came to Jesus and asked, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus asked him, "How do you read it?" The professor replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus replied, "That is correct. Do this and you will live." Wishing to justify himself, he asked, "So who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied with this story. A man was traveling from Topeka to Hutchinson when he saw someone along the side of the road whose car had broken down. When he stopped to help, he discovered that it was actually a setup by thieves who then beat him, stole his cash, his credit cards, his identity, and left him lying unconscious along the side of the road. Now, it just so happened that a pastor of a conservative church was going down the same highway. And when he saw the fellow, he stepped on the gas and scooted on by. Shortly after, the pastor of a very progressive church came down the road, and when he saw what had happened, he slid to the other side of the road, left the cruise control on, and kept right on going. Then a hijab-wearing Muslim woman traveling that way came upon the fellow. When she saw the man, she was moved to tears. She stopped and bound up his wounds as best that she could, poured some water from her water bottle to cleanse his wounds a bit and to bring him back to semi-consciousness. She helped him into the back seat of her car where he could lay down while she drove him to NMC Health Emergency Room. And she said to the intake clerk, "You take good care of this man that I found along the side of the road. I don't know who he is, but here's my credit card. If he's uninsured and can't pay the bill, don't turn it over to a debt collector. Use my credit card to pay the account." Then Jesus looked at the seminary professor and said, "So which of these was a neighbor to this man?" The professor replied, "The one who stopped to care for him." Jesus replied, "Follow her example, and you will truly live a life of eternal meaning." May God add his blessing to the application of the Scriptures. We're going to continue to hearing stories this morning of our journeys as people who need or share Samaritan kindness. Amy and Krista and then Norm will come and share with us. Blessings to each of you.
I just told Cora, my belly feels a little wiggly. She said, "Really?" When Derek asked if I would share about being a neighbor, a couple of stories came to mind. When I got to thinking about it, the meat of those had to do with me learning about being compassionate toward myself and being able to set a boundary. So this is my humble offering. A dozen years ago, I had a conversation with my aunt. I felt indebted to her and my uncle for the years of support they provided as my dad's health declined. I had a hunch that we had an accounting system in our family that quietly kept track of debts and repayments. So when she responded by telling me directly and clearly that she had helped because she wanted to, and that no repayment was needed, I was shocked. I had a hard time receiving that. Our kids were young at the time, and I fully expected her to say that as time passed, I would be better situated to help out with another aging couple in our family. She went on from there to make it clear that she didn't expect me to repay anyone in the way I had received help. She was confident I would contribute to the world in my way, and that was good enough for her. I have been so grateful for the gift of that conversation so many times. To have clear communication about expectations was beautiful, and I felt relieved of a burden that felt very heavy. And I left with a much broader view of how I could help others. Now, for me, the impetus for helping others, especially in a time of acute need, has been for recognition. When someone asks how the new widow is doing, maybe she'll say, well, Amy has been so great. She takes care of a lot of stuff. And maybe if I peek at Facebook, my name will be mentioned as they're giving updates about how things are going. But this kind of incentive is a pretty dry well. Even if I do get the recognition, it's not actually satisfying, and I can pretty quickly become resentful of the help that I offered and they now rightfully expect. This might be having to do with that early days accounting stuff. I don't know. Thanks to being in therapy, I have learned that I actually have needs and feelings, and I am able to start noticing those. Nowadays, if I'm asked to help with something and I actually need some time alone or rest, there's better odds that my reply can be something honest. You know, that doesn't work for me right now, but thanks for asking. Ask me again next time. I know what it feels like to help because I genuinely want to, and I'm never looking for an audience or recognition when it comes from that place. I was reminded this week that my success varies. A good friend became very sick, and it's been hard for me not to take on all of her needs. I'd appreciate your thoughts for us both. When my therapist started talking about the idea of starting from a place of being compassionate toward oneself, I really didn't get it. But over time, I've started this very gentle and understanding way of relating to myself. I've actually stood in the grocery store and said, okay, sweetie pie, I know you're tired and you don't really want to do this. It's okay. For me, acknowledging feelings and needs and giving space for those has been transformative. Yesterday, I found bagworms on my roses. And as I was picking those off, I thought of Chuck picking all the mulberries he could see. Of course, we both missed some until looking from a different perspective, and then probably missed some more. As I worked, a particularly annoying neighbor passed and asked, what did I think of my coworker who this year is getting a much lower teaching load while adding some minimal administrative tasks? I hadn't heard anything about this, and I have known this neighbor to stir the pot with news that might not be news, like this. Compassion for self has helped me consider more generous interpretations of what folks might need or feel. How many different interpretations of my annoying neighbor could we come up with? Is this guy lonely? Does he not know how to have a conversation unless he's stirring things up? Maybe he's insecure. Those aren't even very creative interpretations. We could go on and on. Starting with compassion for myself and having an idea of how to honor boundaries lets me work on being more okay for myself and having a more generous view of my neighbor.
So Derek asked several of us to do this about, before he left, so a month or so ago. He said, think of a time when you experienced someone else's love for you as a neighbor, or where you had the opportunity to share love with a neighbor. Well, it was easier for me to think about others showing love and care to me than about the times when I might have done it for someone else. As you've often heard from John and from me, some of the most stark examples of this have come for us when we have visited India. While we were in India, in the village where the clinic is, we often take walks around the village. And many times, very poor families welcome us into their homes while we are out on these walks. Sometimes these are very, primitive, basic homes, mud wall, thatch roof houses, one-room shacks, and they just treat us like royalty. They go scrounge up snacks for us. They send someone to run to the little corner store and buy us soda because they know we can't drink their water. And so it's just a very humbling experience to be treated like royalty by those for whom you know they're making a sacrifice to serve you. It's a good example for me. Or the example of our friend Olga's parents, who live in India, who we had only met once before. They didn't speak English, we didn't speak Telugu, yet when it was time for us to go pick up our daughter, Meghana, from the orphanage in Hyderabad, they hosted us in their apartment for the time while we were there. They were elderly, her dad more so than her mom, and he struggled to walk. I can't remember why, but he had, some walking difficulties. Yet they gave us their bedroom, their bed. They served us, fed us, loved on us for several days during that time while we were learning to know our daughter. That was one of the most tender experiences of our life, and it was shared with these folks who we really didn't know very well. Radical hospitality. I also thought of a different kind of example of radical neighborly love when someone sort of broke the rules to extend love and hospitality to us. And this was shown to us by my Amish grandma. For those of you who may not know, the Amish are a very conservative group, and there's a lot of rules. This is just one example of one of the rules. If you want to know more, I'll be happy to talk with you about it sometime. But on with the story. So my grandma was Amish, we were not. My parents had never joined the Amish church. They never were baptized and joined the church. They decided that they didn't want to be Amish, and so when they got married, they started their household, and they just started going to, the worldly Mennonite church. But it was okay for Grandma to share a meal with us because my parents had never joined the church, so they had never been members and left. So it was still okay for them to eat with us at the same table. Again, sort of a nitpicky little rule, but my uncle, my dad's brother, had joined the Amish church when he was younger and then left the church altogether. Still to this day, doesn't really affiliate with any sort of church. So he was under the ban. He was supposed to be excommunicated, and Amish church members weren't supposed to share a meal around the table with him. So if he was visiting, my grandma would still host, show her love for all of us with a meal, probably mashed potatoes and noodles. There's my comfort food in a nutshell. By sitting, we would all sit in chairs around the room and hold our plates. And we just weren't sitting at the table, at a shared table. I thought that was a very creative way to get around that rule, and she's awesome. Practicing hospitality has always been pretty easy for us. I love to cook, and I love to take food to people who might be needing it, to new neighbors, people who are sick or experiencing something where a meal might be helpful. We've opened our home to college students and sometimes their families. Sometimes it's even been challenging for us to do it, maybe due to the time, how busy we are, logistics, whatever. One time we were even bold enough to open our home to a young man that was biking across the U.S. He had first asked John if he could pitch his tent in the yard of the church and just camp there overnight. But we convinced him to come to our house and sleep in one of our beds, eat a meal with us, do his laundry, take a shower. We didn't know him at all. I mean, he could have been someone who set out to hurt our family, but he seemed like just an adventurous young man, and so we took a chance, and he was. It was a great experience for our family. But generally, we've always played it pretty safe in our hospitality. It's usually extending it to someone in my community, someone in our circle. I don't know if the priest and the Levite passed the injured man by because they just couldn't be bothered, or if it was inconvenient for them, or if there was something different about the man who was injured that made them uncomfortable. But my challenge for me from this story is to be more radical in my neighborly love and my hospitality. I want to have the nerve to break some rules with my hospitality, or more importantly, to make the move to really branch out and open my world to others with whom I normally wouldn't feel so comfortable with. Other cultures, other worldviews, other political beliefs, maybe even be willing to share a meal with family that I know differs in their beliefs from me and actually talk about them instead of avoiding the conversations. So to do that, I need to be willing to put myself in some uncomfortable situations. That's my continual challenge. But I think a warm meal or a plate of cookies can start to break down some barriers. So I'll push myself to keep trying and to be a little more uncomfortable in my hospitality.
I didn't exactly follow Derek's directions. But I am going to share something that's very close to my heart. One of the things that has often puzzled me about this story was how the question that was asked was, who is my neighbor? In other words, who do I have to love? And Jesus ends the story by asking, who was the neighbor? He changed it. And what John said last week helped me put words to this. Jesus changed the focus from who do I have to love to who should I be? I can't do this without emotion, sorry. Last week, we marked the 23rd year since the passing of the person whom I learned the most about loving my neighbor. Our son, Ethan, died in a car accident at the age of 21, 23 years ago. Ethan was a child prodigy at being a neighbor. He knew how to do it, he did it often, and he did it well. From the time of Ethan's memorial service to very recently, we have heard many stories from his classmates. Elementary school stories, middle school stories, high school stories, and college stories about how he was there for them when they needed a friend. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories, but first I'm going to tell you my favorite story. And this story is my favorite because I actually observed it firsthand. I didn't hear it from somebody else. And it also has a baseball game involved in it. Ethan was probably, 11 or 12 years old, playing summer baseball. And he played on the infield. I think he was playing second base. And Jared was the left fielder. Jared and Ethan weren't necessarily close to each other, but they were friends. And the game was this. Last inning, 2 outs. Ethan's team is ahead by 1 run. The other team's up to bat. They get 2 guys on base. They need 1 more out to win the game. The batter hits a fly ball to left field where Jared is, and Jared doesn't have to move. The ball is coming right to him. He puts up his glove. The ball hits his glove and falls to the ground. The 2 runs score, Ethan's team loses. And you can imagine what 11 and 12-year-olds are doing right now. The whole team is throwing their gloves on the ground, their hats on the ground, kicking dirt, kicking their gloves around, showing in every way that they can their disgust at what just happened. Except for Ethan. Jared is standing in left field. He doesn't know what to do. He can't move. Ethan walks out to left field, puts his arm around Jared's shoulders, and walks back with him. I don't know what words were said, if any. Often my decision to intervene when I saw a person in need was based on whether or not I thought I had the skills or the resources to fix the problem. That's what went through my head. Another story. I was driving Ethan back from something that he'd been at. We were driving home, just he and I in the car together on Highway 50. And as we were driving, there was ahead of us, off to the side of the road, a car that was obviously broken down, and I think there were 4 late teen, early 20, college-age type people sort of milling around the car. And Ethan said, "Dad, we have to stop." My head goes, "What? You don't know how to fix a car. I don't know how to fix a car. Why would we stop?" "Dad, we have to stop." So I stopped. We couldn't fix our car. We couldn't fix their problem. These are the days before cell phones. So what we could do, was allow these 4 people to pile into the back seat of our car, and we drove them to the nearest phone, which was way more than I thought I could do. Kind of ridiculous, right? But Ethan said, "Dad, we have to stop." At this point, I'm starting to get the picture. I think loving my neighbor is letting someone's predicament or suffering or simply needing attention touch my heart. And letting that love that God has put in my heart shape my response. One more story. A day or so after Ethan's death, I was pretty much feeling lost. I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know what to do. So I did the only thing that at that point in my life was something that I could do that just kind of came naturally and I didn't have to think about it. I went for a run on the bike path along Sand Creek. As I was running under one of the bridges, there was a boy there who had just caught a fish. And he obviously wanted to show me this fish that he had caught. Dad, we have to stop. Not something that I would normally do on a run. But I stopped and just shared a moment with this kid who wanted to show me the fish he had caught. Dad, we have to stop. When I recall that experience, I often think that the experience of Ethan's death has moved me to a different place in terms of thinking what's important, what I should pay attention to and do. But I don't think that's quite right. It wasn't Ethan's death. It was Ethan's life, teaching me to be a neighbor.